everybody. Welcome back to the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, we are in the season. The season has begun. We have had actual Ohio State football with the Buckeyes prevailing in a nail-biter over the Nebraska Cornhuskers as the Buckeyes score 52 on opening day to beat the Huskers 52-17. I don't think either of us saw Nebraska struggling to get points, but this was a game where, with the exception of the opening drive, it really was a struggle for the Cornhuskers offense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm just glad that Ohio State, they seem to kind of turn things – I don't want to say turn things around. That might be a little too strong, but they seem to kind of get going as the game progressed. So it was sloppy at times, but by the same token, I had kind of anticipated that. And Ohio State, they were pretty much in command, like for the latter part of the game.
Yes, your prediction was 38-20 Ohio State. Mine was 49-27, so you were closer on the Nebraska end, and I was closer on the Ohio State end. And so this one's a wash.
For a while there, it was 38-17. I thought, I'm looking pretty good. And then Ohio State kind of, like I said, they were able to get things going and add a few more touchdowns before it ended. But a win is a win. I'm sure that there's a lot that the Ohio State coaches and players will be working on before they hit the road to go to Happy Valley this weekend.
Yeah, I was happy to see Jack Miller get in the end zone late to push that score line a little closer to what I had for Ohio State. But so yeah, 52-17, and this one started out. We were wanting to see what Kerry Combs' new defensive coordinator's defense would look like, and the early returns were not favorable. This is why you got to be careful. See, we're coming up on Election Day, and those early precincts come in, and you can't just make a snap judgment about things. You have to wait to see how it plays out.
Yeah, very, very apropos analogy. We'll see if the single high safety look is going to remain, because that's not something that Kerry Combs is. I'm not saying that he is against, but not something that he's truly familiar with. That's a holdover from Jeff Hafley. Now, obviously, that's what Ryan Day would like, but we'll see if it's going to remain, because it kind of showed some deficiencies as it relates to, when you play that kind of style of defense, some of the issues that you had. I mean, we were all kind of wondering if we could somehow petition the Los Angeles Rams to get Jordan Fuller back, because some of those big plays, you didn't see that when Jordan Fuller was back there. But I think the safeties, they're going to get it figured out before the season's over.
Yeah, I think Josh Proctor is a high-risk, high-reward type of player, where Jordan Fuller was a little more consistent and dependable. Wasn't making, highlight reel plays, but at the same time he was just being steady. And Proctor, when he flashes, makes highlight reel type hits, and when he makes a mistake, that's on the other team's highlight reel. So we might see a little bit of adjustment needs to be made there, a little bit more progress. But the team came out and gave up a 4-play, 75-yard touchdown drive, which included a 47-yard run from Luke McCaffrey over the left end. And it looked like I don't know about you, but I flashed back to that crazy Maryland game a few years back, when the guy would just hit the sideline and there were no Buckeyes there, and he would just run down the sideline unopposed. And that's kind of what that run reminded me of.
That's a bad omen right there. Hopefully, because that was late in the season, that game. That was near the end of the season. So, as I said a few moments ago, that I think the Ohio State defense, obviously a lot of room to work on for improvement. So let's hope that your analogy to a few years ago with that Maryland game, that it doesn't come to pass, for future opponents that Ohio State plays in 2020.
Mm-hmm. Well, the good news is the the Buckeyes pretty much clamped down well after that. Only gave up 10 more points the rest of the day. The Ohio State offense answered immediately with an 11-play, 75-yard drive, which was capped by a run by Master Teague for 1 yard. And running on this day, not as easy as you and I probably would have expected it to be. Now, Nebraska does have a good defensive line and improved linebackers and a good secondary. So you would expect them to give teams some difficulty in the run game. But with the offensive line that Ohio State has, it's billed as maybe the best line that Ohio State has ever had, but it didn't look like the best line Ohio State has ever had on Saturday.
No, it didn't. And it was concerning to see Ohio State struggling to run the ball with either Master Teague or Trey Sermon. As I said a few moments ago, I think that will be something that will be worked on. It was also concerning to see Justin Fields carry the ball as much as he did. Now, granted, I know that that's always going to be an aspect of the offense, that you want the quarterback run to be an element, to kind of take advantage of the numbers. But by the same token, don't want to expose Justin Fields to too many hits, especially early in the season when Ohio State's just getting started.
Yeah, I kind of thought, looking back at it, it looked to me like Justin had options there and decided to keep, made the read to keep, and you'd have to say in most of those cases he was correct. But that's a part and parcel of the play calling. I don't think those were called quarterback runs. I think they were called options, and the read was to keep. So, if Nebraska's strategy was, hey, if it's a zone read play, or read option play, we'll make Justin Fields take extra hits. And if that's going to be the strategy, then, kudos to them for a good game plan.
And they even alluded to that during the telecast, that it might have been a function of the Nebraska defense that Justin Fields was reading. I'm just making the point that last year, we all know near the end of the season, Justin Fields, a lot of the bumps and bruises that he was sustaining was, impacting his play. And that's, I guess, selfishly, I'm hoping that he doesn't keep as much and doesn't carry the ball as much, because we certainly want him to be as healthy as possible later in the season.
Yeah, and really the answer to that is, if you don't want your quarterback to take those hits, don't make those runs part of the offense. I mean, don't call those plays. If you want to run the ball, run the ball. But I think that they were maybe forced into that a little bit with the lack of success by the running backs. So we'll see how they adjust, and we'll see how they get it going. Wyatt Davis didn't seem to be too concerned about the running game, and Ryan Day didn't seem to be too worried about it. So maybe that's something they've already addressed and are working towards fixing for this week. But, of course, the defense that they'll go up against, the defensive line they'll go up against, exponentially better than Nebraska's. So we shall see how it goes. Now, Ohio State was able to course correct a little bit and take a 14-7 lead after getting a stop on defense and then going down a 6-play, 76-yard drive. And this one was basically it's a big play to Garrett Wilson, 42 yards for a touchdown. And I need a ruling on this from you, Chip. Is Garrett Wilson in the slot a cheat code, or is it just plain stealing?
I'm going to go with the cheat code. That seems more fun that way. Honestly, even the broadcast team at the half were saying how Garrett Wilson is, Urban Meyer was alluding to the fact that, during the recruiting of Garrett Wilson, he was arguably the best wide receiver in high school. And I think the opportunity for him to truly blossom this year is going to be from that slot wide receiver position.
I think he's about as close to unstoppable as we've seen in the Ohio State pass game. He is just so hard to handle, and he runs good routes, and he's got great hands, and he can run after the catch, so you have to be at least somewhat neutral, like non-aggressive, because he can run right by you. it's just going to create a lot of problems. And we saw it third down after third down. We saw Justin Fields call his number, and it was, he only threw one incomplete pass all day. So to Garrett Wilson, he was perfect.
And let's not forget that a lot of the great opportunities that Garrett Wilson had was as a result of his teammates at the wide receiver position, Jameson Williams, and as well as Chris Olave. Like the fact that it's almost, as you said, it's almost impossible to cover Garrett Wilson, considering you have to pay attention to the other guys on the field as well.
Right. So Ohio State gets another 3 and out on defense. I'm sorry. The Buckeyes were able to get the stops that they needed, but Nebraska was able to get back on the board and get back in the game with a 14-14 score in the second quarter. This was his Dedrick Mills rush up the middle, and this was an 11-play, 78-yard drive. And this is the kind of thing that we're not going to see a lot of teams able to put together consistently long, sustained drives against an Ohio State defense. At least they haven't been able to much in the past, with some exceptions, some years when the defense hasn't been up to snuff. But this was really the long, sustained drive of the game for what we expect to be a good Nebraska offense.
And we had talked about going into the game against Nebraska, the concern that seems warranted. I keep going back to the fact that I think things will be certainly improved upon. The Ohio State interior defensive line against the run, we already talked about like the big run by Luke McCaffrey earlier in the game, but that if there is a concern going into the game at Penn State as well as the rest of the Big Ten opponents that Ohio State's going to be playing, is the Ohio State defensive performance on the interior. Now, I know we haven't talked about him yet. Haskell Garrett, it seemed things improved once Haskell Garrett was inserted into the lineup, and that is not meant to discredit, because I know Tommy Togiai was out there, but I think Haskell Garrett certainly showed that he needs to be probably a starter and playing certainly more than he did at the beginning of the Nebraska game.
That was a happy surprise to see Haskell Garrett on the field. That's something that, when the not really depth chart, but the availability chart came out on Friday, it was kind of caught everybody off guard that Haskell Garrett was available for the game, and then to be as involved as he was and to have as many impactful plays as he did, it was just great to see him out there, not just for the story of it all, of him surviving being shot in the face and being able to play by opening day, but also the fact that he was a very effective player for Ohio State.
Yeah, he certainly made an impact right from the onset when he came in with a sack, and then I think on the very next play, I'm not sure if it was registered as a sack or a tackle for loss along with Josh Proctor, but he was disruptive, it seemed, right from the onset when he came in. And like you said, it certainly is a feel-good story and a surprising one to see him so effective considering everything he went through in this offseason. Indeed.
Ohio State came back with a field goal on the next drive, having to settle for field goal, 17-14. It was a 34-yarder. Again, there was some opportunities to perhaps do more. I think this might have been the drive where there was a give to the running back that probably should have been a keep, and I think he would have had clear sailing to the end zone. But for the most part, a good effective drive. I mean, it started from the 12-yard line. We had I think that was the one that DeMario McCall muffed and had to pick up. But it was 17-14 Ohio State, and the Buckeyes never trailed again after that.
Yeah, it seemed as though they kind of got any of the, I don't want to call them the jitters, but any of the challenges, like I said, I don't know if it was personnel, the insertion of Haskell Garrett on the defensive side of the ball, or they started figuring out what Nebraska was doing schematically on defense, and they started to find the holes and the creases in that defense. It just seemed as though from that point on, Ohio State was pretty much in control of the game.
Right. The next time that Nebraska touched the ball, it was 17-14. That was a 3-and-out that included a Haskell-Garrett sack and a tackle for loss by Josh Proctor, and also a nice play for no gain by Zach Harrison and Tommy Togiai. Now, Zach Harrison didn't start the game and only played about 15 snaps, so that was a little curious, and we don't really have an explanation for that, but I think this probably is a better defense with Zach Harrison on the field.
I would think so, but since we're not privy to the practice performances, I mean, because I may be mistaken. I think it was Jonathan Cooper was at the one end and Tyler Friday was at the other. I think Antoine Jackson actually started on the interior of the defensive line along with Tommy Togiai, and he was then replaced by Haskell Garrett. Maybe there was something in practice that had Tyler Friday worthy of starting over Zach Harrison. I agree with you. I would think that it would be a better defense with Zach Harrison possibly starting. Maybe Coach Johnson is, maybe he believes that right now at this stage of his career that Zach Harrison is better being rotated in versus starting. But we'll see this coming weekend and the rest of the year throughout the Big Ten schedule.
The Buckeyes came right down and scored after that, made it 24-14, another Master Teague run. This one 6 yards, and from that point on, it was felt pretty good at that point about Ohio State's chances to go ahead and win this game.
Yeah, and then later on, as it was 24-14 at the half, it just seemed as though, even though, Nebraska, they kept battling, it just seemed as though Ohio State was firmly in control, especially, by the end of the third quarter. I mean, it was pretty much done.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State did a lot of good things in that half. I mean, you had Justin Fields was just absolutely on fire. The only incomplete pass he threw in the game, really, you would have expected Chris Olave to come down with that, but he gets hit in the air, comes down awkwardly, hits the ground, it pops out. Kind of hard to fault a kid for falling, 8 feet through the air, landing on his head, and a little tough to hang on to the ball. But Justin will want him to hang on to that one next time.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little spoiled, kind of the expectations of Chris Olave. It was a very difficult catch. It would have been spectacular if he had held on to it, but I'll cut him some slack. And considering that was the only incompletion that Justin Fields threw, like I said, we'll let him slide with that one.
Right. It was the catching part of it wasn't the problem. It was the landing and maintaining the ball was the real problem, because the ball was put in a perfect spot. It maybe could have been delivered maybe a half second earlier, but it was it was another deep ball that was beautiful and on the money. So you can't fault the quarterback too much on that one, and certainly it's a tough ask of Chris Olave to bounce off his head and maintain control of the football. So we'll let that one slide this week. But the Buckeyes.
I just hope, I know we're going to talk about it later, but I just hope Chris Olave is healthy enough to play against Penn State, because certainly the Buckeyes are going to need him.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. We will get into some of that after we finish going through the game a little bit. But the Buckeyes came out of the third quarter, or come out of the locker room in the third quarter. They got the first possession, and it basically said, "We're done with you. We're going to go ahead and put this thing away." And they go out and have an 8-play, 75-yard drive. And this one's Justin Fields running it for 17 yards for a touchdown. And it was one of those plays when it happened that, he got out wide, he got the first down. You're like, okay, get out of bounds, get out of bounds, get out. And then he spun inside and scored the touchdown.
Now, that one was almost another cheat code type play, too, because I certainly, watching it, thought he's going to get out of bounds, and then the unexpected spin move to take him into the end zone to score that touchdown was certainly something I did not anticipate.
Yeah, the Nebraska, any real hopes they had of getting back in the game ended on their next drive when, on the 7th play of the drive, Adrian Martinez coughed it up, and it was scooped and scored by Seven Banks, and Seven ran for 6 and made it 38-14 after the point after.
That play, you were talking about something that was reminiscent of earlier of when Nebraska scored that long run. It reminded you of the Maryland game a few years ago. That fumble and scoop and score. Now, again, it just kind of reminded me. I know obviously different players altogether, but it reminded me of when Ohio State, when they played against Navy, and Darren Lee had a comparable situation where he recovered a fumble and scooped and scored against Navy back in 2014.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good when the defense can contribute on the scoreboard. It certainly makes things a little easier, and it was nice to see that the Silver Bullets were able to put a touchdown up on the board and really put the game away at that point. It was kind of really not much of a game from that point on. Nebraska tacked on a field goal on the next drive, and that one included an Adrian Martinez 39-yard run. And I think that this defense it showed it against Clemson. This was talked about on the broadcast also, that when they're in coverage and they're locked up man to man, and the quarterback takes off, and if it's a good quarterback, they can turn an average play into a really big play, and certainly Martinez was able to do that here, and that's something that they're going to have to be aware of that against Penn State as well, because Penn State's not afraid to call quarterback draws and have the quarterback take off. Sean Clifford is not afraid to tuck it and run if he doesn't like what he sees down the field.
Certainly, and you would not only expect Penn State, but other Big Ten opponents that Ohio State's going to be facing that have any kind of a mobile quarterback, that they're going to try to do whatever they can to exploit what they consider a weakness in the Ohio State defense.
Absolutely, that's what they get paid to do. So the coaching staff to other teams, they're paid to dissect film, figure out what they can do to be effective, and that's something that has now been seen 2 games in a row. So the quarterback taking off, I don't know that Clifford is as dynamic as Martinez, but he moves well. He's got decent size, so he's kind of hard to bring down the open field anyway. So I would expect to see Penn State try to utilize that this Saturday. That's the score at the end of 3, as your Buckeyes are ahead 38-17, a nice comfortable 3-touchdown lead. See if they can go into the 4th and see this thing out, and it turns out they can, because they got the next points on the board. Ohio State was able to make it 45-17 with a Justin Fields pass to Jackson Smith and Jigba. And if you haven't seen this play, I don't know where you've been, because it's been all over social media. It's been all over every highlight package. I mean, normally when you see Ohio State win by this scoring margin, on these highlight shows, you'll see the first 3 or 4 touchdowns maybe, and that's about it. But this one, sort of a garbage time touchdown, and it still made all the highlight reels.
Oh, as well as should. And for all of the hype surrounding Jackson Smith and Jigba, that play certainly showed that the hype was justified, because just the level of effort and concentration to make sure that he had a foot down in bounds to make the touchdown reception. I mean, it was just a tremendous effort, and what a debut for a very promising freshman wide receiver.
It was astounding. I mean, that was basically a gravity-defying play. I mean, when the ball, when he caught the ball and the official right on the spot waved it incomplete, I didn't even think twice about it. And then they showed the replay, and I was like, "What? Are you kidding me?" I mean, that's really the only reaction you could have. And I think that it was, like Tom Orr said on the Buckeye Weekly podcast, it's once you know that that's in the arsenal and it's going to come out again at some point, then that's fun to watch for.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's exactly how they drew it up, in the playbook. If anything, my respect for Jackson Smith and Jigba, because you just referenced Tom, and they were saying how just over the summer, he was the very first freshman to get the black stripe removed, and that's kind of like that's always you kind of get the impression, well, which players are turning heads, and his name was one of those on social media that you were hearing nothing but good things about. I was just so impressed with just that focus, that concentration, knowing that he knew, Jackson Smith and Jigba knew that he was truly tiptoeing the line and did everything within his power, like you said, kind of gravity-defying movement to make sure that he could get at least 1 foot down while maintaining control and possession of the ball. It was just what an amazing play by a true freshman, and if anything, it just kind of bears repeating that he's going to be one of those players that certainly has a very promising future at Ohio State.
Has anybody checked to make sure he was not from Krypton?
I don't know about that. I don't know. That might be something that the opposing teams are looking into.
All right, then Ohio State closed it out with the apology touchdown with Jack Miller, who we found out on Saturday is the backup to Justin Fields, as he got to work in relief of Fields and led the team on a scoring drive, rushing it in himself from 2 yards out. And that was the one that Ryan Day said after the game, hey, sorry about that. Didn't really mean to do that. If we had it to do over again, we'd have taken a knee. And, well, I'm glad he didn't. I like that moment for Jack Miller. His first collegiate game, gets on the field, scores a touchdown against Nebraska. That's just a dream come true for the kid.
And I truly respect what Nebraska Scott Frost had to say. I'm not sure. I'm going to say it incorrectly, but he, in essence, said no apology was necessary. It's like if Nebraska was playing better, then no apology necessary. It was kind of like in so many words. It's like it's Ryan Day. I respect him for making the apology, but I think Scott Frost was, pure class and not griping about it. There's maybe we have a difference of opinion, but there's a big difference between when you're running the ball versus throwing the ball into the end zone when you're up. You know what I mean? And Jack Miller being a true freshman in there, they were just trying to, get them some playing time. It was not only Jack Miller, but it was, Xavier Johnson. I saw, some of the other, the backup line, for example, like Luke Whippler, who's a true freshman, was at center by that point. So they were just trying to get players some necessary game reps, which I'm always a big advocate of. If there's a critique I have of Ryan Day, it's not so much that Jack Miller scored a touchdown, is that I would have liked to have seen Jack Miller or the other backups in there sooner. Even the broadcast team kind of made a reference to that with about almost 8 minutes left, and Ohio State was up 45-17. The game was no longer in doubt, and by one point, Justin Fields took, I think, what was either like the third or fourth sack of the game. Now, a lot of those sacks, if there's a critique I have of Justin Fields, is because he's holding on to the ball, trying, rather than just throwing it out of bounds. Right. So some of those sacks were on him. My larger point being is, even the broadcast team said, why is he in there? Because if he gets hurt, you're sitting there thinking, okay, you're already up 45-17. And like you said, Jack Miller as the backup, and I have no doubt in my mind that CJ Stroud is going to also get playing time. Maybe not this weekend, but in future games, because I think they're going to do anything and everything they possibly can to keep both of those freshman quarterbacks happy, because as much as I would like to see Justin Fields in Columbus for 2021, it will not be surprising if he tests the waters of the NFL draft. And so Jack Miller or CJ Stroud could very well be your 2021 Ohio State starter at quarterback.
Right. I agree with you about Justin Fields holding the ball too long a few times and taking those sacks. And he needs to, get that clock in his head. It's got to go off. It's got to be out. And if it's not out, you roll around to the edge and throw it away or tuck it and run, whatever you need to do. Get what you can out of the play. But, you can't be standing back there and taking hits like that and on a play that has taken that long to develop. There was one where they talked about it was a clear out for Garrett Wilson. It was a slow developing play, and it just he ran out of time right before he was able to get clear. But I think that was a problem last year for Justin Fields. We wondered if he's going to make any progress on that front, and it's too early to say whether he has or hasn't because it's the first game, and he's still got to start trusting some of those guys. Even every season is new, so every season you have to make sure that you can trust those guys, especially when you got some new starters out there at those wide receiver positions and new guys rotating in. So we'll see how that goes. That's something we'll monitor closely moving forward. But here we go, our picks to click. I think we both did okay on offense, Chip. You took Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson had a pretty okay game for Ohio State in the receiving department. Let's go to the stats here and let you know that Garrett Wilson, 7 catches, 129 yards, and a touchdown. 7 times targeted, 7 catches. Not too bad.
Not at all. Very happy to see that he had such a strong game right out of the gate. As I said during the halftime show, the analysts, which included Urban Meyer, were raving about his performance. So it was very good to see Garrett Wilson build off what was a strong freshman season in the first game of the 2020 season as a sophomore.
Yeah, and all Justin Fields did on the day was go 20 of 21 with that one drop by Chris Olave, 276 yards, 2 touchdowns. No interceptions, so not too bad.
Not bad at all. Like I said, we just got to work on that. Like you said, that internal clock. Let's not think that we have more time back there, and let's lessen those coverage sacks by throwing the ball to, I don't know, like we'll just say like maybe the Buckeye guy cut out in the second row or whoever it might be. That person's always open, and like I said, it's one less hit. It's going to be on Justin Fields' body.
Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. Our picks to click. You had Marcus Hooker, and I took Pete Werner. And I don't think that this was a good. Should say good. I don't think it was a one of the better performances we'll ever see out of this defense, but they only give up 17 points to a really good offense. Most of the struggles came on the opening drive. They tended to do better after that. Werner did miss a tackle or two, but he still led the team in tackles with 7, 4 solos, 3 assists. He had a tackle for loss for 4 yards. Marcus Hooker finished tied for 4th on the team in tackles with 4, all solos. So I think overall we could say that these guys clicked.
Okay. I was going to say I wasn't going to take exception if you said that they didn't, because Marcus Hooker making his first start at safety, we talked about that big play by Nebraska by Luke McCaffrey. He had a badly missed tackle that contributed to that long run. Now later on, Marcus Hooker had I don't want to say it was a big hit on Nebraska's Jack Stoll. That kind of I don't want to say that it didn't knock Stoll out of the game. I think it looked like it hurt something fierce, but I would say that defensively, I kind of anticipated this. To be quite honest, is that I haven't seen too many defenses across college football this season playing too well, and I certainly didn't think Ohio State was going to be any different. So Yeah, I mean, if you say that they both clicked, that's fine. If you were to say that neither of them, that's fine too.
Well, I always build in for the first game or two, you're going to miss more tackles early in the season because you haven't had, these guys aren't going full tilt at each other in practice. So, there's only so much you can simulate. And so once you get out there under game conditions, yeah, you're going to miss a tackle here and there early until you get your bearings and get used to doing that again. So we see it every year, so it's not really shocking. And again, once the team settled down after that first drive, they mostly were very good. And we'll see really what becomes of the Nebraska offense as the season unfolds. Maybe it's not as good as we think it is, and maybe we'll look back and think that this was even a worse performance by the defense. I know it's the one thing that I think the fans have complained the most about on social media, because how can you really fault what Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Justin Fields were able to do? They're going to criticize the running game a little bit, but I think that will be okay. We'll see. I think it won't be. I don't think the team's going to run for 300 yards against Penn State, but I think they'll get it fixed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think defensively, like you said, there's usually some sloppiness earlier in the season. And as we noted last week, you're talking about an Ohio State defense that, oh, by the way, they lost 3 first-round draft choices. One of them was the second overall pick. They also, the 3rd pick overall in the draft, and then Damon Arnett was I think a top 20 draft choice himself. So, both corners. We talked about Jordan Fuller, even though he was a 6th-round draft choice. I mean, that steadying influence at safety. And Chase Young is difficult to replace. Even Urban Meyer, I keep going back to the halftime analysis, he was saying that when you're so used to having the Bosas and somebody like Chase Young at defensive end, it's not that Ohio State lacks talent on the defensive line. It's just that they're not, as experienced, and it's just they're young. It's going to take time. So we already talked about Zach Harrison, so, Tyler Friday, and, some of those other players, I think, with given the opportunity, that as the season progresses, I think the defense will only improve.
Right. The running backs, Trey Sermon, I thought as the game went on, Sermon was able to get more in the running game than he was early in the game. He finished as the leading rusher with 55 yards. Justin Fields was second with 54 yards. And Master Teague had 41 yards and Steel Chambers 32. But Teague obviously had the 2 touchdowns. You wonder, too, how much it affects an offense with 2 stylistically very different tailbacks and alternating drives, because I was a little surprised that this is the Master Teague drive, this is the Trey Sermon drive. It wasn't like more one guy than the other. It was just this guy, then this guy, then this guy, then this guy. And it kind of takes you back to when J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, this is the Mike Weber drive, this is the J.K. Dobbins drive. And that was also less effective than when there was one guy.
Very good point. And as far as Master Teague goes, I think he kind of demonstrated that, he's a very good player. Obviously, the 2 touchdowns, when he is running straight at you, that I cannot imagine that is a pleasant experience to try and stop.
Yeah, right.
But that being said, I think he also demonstrated the fact that, he's maybe it just wasn't a good defense for him. He doesn't seem to have that lateral shiftiness, that quickness, that I think Sermon has. And to your point, I think that alternating, that it contributed to the lack of cohesive rhythm for the offense. I don't know. Maybe, it certainly seemed as though as the game progressed that Sermon was better. As maybe that, like, they kind of started getting into more of a flow. I was impressed with Steel Chambers. Granted it was near the end of the game and the game was already decided. I also thought Xavier Johnson, was also looked impressive as well. So I'm kind of curious to see if they kind of go more towards, like you said, like more of a consistent one guy. Maybe they are going to try to alternate, but maybe you're onto something that maybe it kind of added to the inconsistency of the rushing attack.
Yeah, the the yards per carry in this game, Trey Sermon ended up at 5 yards per carry, which is a good average. Justin Fields with the sacks and the rushes combined averaged 3.5, and Master Teague averaged 3.5, which it's okay. It's not great, but it's fine. Steel Chambers averaged 8 yards per carry, only 4 attempts, so small sample size, but he seemed to have, like you said, he seemed to be the most effective, but again at a time of the game where the game was not in doubt. And same with Xavier Johnson, who averaged 4.2 yards per carry. But Chip, the guy who averaged the most yards per carry was Jack Miller, 11.5 yard average. Clearly, he should be the starting tailback.
Oh, there you go. It's certainly, yeah. What a logical conclusion. Yeah, I was happy to see, like I said, Jack Miller, because by all accounts, I was kind of under the impression that it was going to be C.J. Stroud, which was going out of those freshman quarterbacks coming in.
I thought so too. Yeah,
right. It's not to imply that Jack Miller's not good, because he was actually the quarterback who had verbally committed to Ohio State way before C.J. Stroud. So, as I said earlier in the podcast, I truly am of the belief that they're going to do whatever they can. The nice thing about this year being so consistently inconsistent is that I think they're going to do whatever they can to get both players in, because I think they see a bright future for both of them. And let's face it, if Justin Fields were to go down, which is the one thing that every Ohio State fan fears, you're going to need your backups to rise up, and let's see that coaching staff get them as many opportunities as possible. I just think for whatever reason they decided Jack Miller was going to get the last few minutes of the game against Nebraska.
Yeah, and he, you can't really take much away from his performance, but he got the team in the end zone, so that's a good thing. It looks like Drew Christman is back. 2 punts, averaged 49 yards, one inside the 20. So maybe we got Drew Christman back.
I can only hope so.
Yeah,
because this is pretty much. I think this is his last go around, and I know that he definitely wants to put on a showcase for the NFL. If the opportunity to continue on after his playing career at Ohio State finishes.
Demario McCall continues to do scary things on kickoffs. I don't know that there is a place on this team for Demario McCall to flourish, and I wonder if the transfer portal awaits for Demario.
It wouldn't be surprising. As somebody who saw Demario McCall play in high school, personally, I always thought I was happy to see Ohio State recruit him and sign him, but I also was of the opinion that, he's going to need a certain niche position. And I'm not sure if under Ryan Day that position exists, because he, I think in his heart, he still looks at himself as a running back, and he's not big enough to run between the tackles. So then, when you bring him in, you're kind of looking at him as like that third down back. Well, we were just talking about that. Maybe that just throws the rest of the offense out of rhythm by, taking him out, because that's kind of the role that I believe that Trey Sermon could fill. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's going to be, I think it might be a challenging year for Demario McCall, because they've certainly soured on him as the punt returner. I mean, I know your concerns are valid about the kickoff returns, but they've certainly removed him as a punt returner. And considering the kickoff return can now be just a fair catch, it just kind of makes you wonder, like you said, what role, if any, he has on this team.
Mm-hmm. In fact, it was a fair catch that he muffed. So,
precisely.
Yeah. So anyway, it was big win for Ohio State on opening day. They'll get ready for Penn State. That'll come up this Saturday. Before we turn the page on this game, though, you mentioned it earlier, and it was a big talking point in this game, was the amount of, I'm going to go ahead and call it how I see it, headhunting by the Nebraska secondary. And there was an early targeting call that was overturned, and I think that was a correct call to overturn it. And then there were 3 controversial plays in the second half. One was reviewed for targeting and confirmed, which it wasn't a real forceful targeting, but it was clearly a case of where the Nebraska defensive back, I think that was the one on Taylor Britt, who he just clearly lunged his helmet forward and hit Jackson Smith-Njigba with the crown of his helmet, and it was upheld and off he went. And then there were 2 on Williams, who, I mean, my goodness, the hit on Chris Olave that ended up knocking him out of the game, the one that you alluded to earlier, there were, 19, 20 replays of that play, and the broadcasters were only concerned with whether or not Olave fumbled, and not what looked like a pretty obvious targeting to me.
It did look like a targeting play, and I mean, I think we're in agreement. I mean, like the whole targeting rule just needs to be completely overhauled. I mean, it's just the way that they apply it, the way that they enforce it. So yeah, I mean, if anything, Nebraska, I kind of wonder, if that's something that the way that they're being coached, I would hope not, because if that's the case, then Nebraska's in for a long year, because you're not going to have any defensive backs. Like you're already going to be down. Think of it this way. They're going to be down, shorthanded going up against Wisconsin, which was not going to be an easy game, let alone now that you have a depleted secondary. So I just think that the whole targeting rule just needs to be completely overhauled. I think it has to be more of almost kind of, I know you're more of a traditional soccer guy, like the idea of like the yellow card, red card type of a penalty. That's how I would like it.
Yeah, and Williams doubled down on it because he did the same thing later in the game and was kicked out. And for me, it was, again, a very obvious launch. And I don't know what Joel Klatt was seeing when he kept saying that Williams was trying to go low, because you don't generally launch yourself into the air in order to go low on a receiver. At least that's not my experience of playing the game. I never thought, I got to get this guy around the waist or ankles, so let me leap into the air and launch myself at him.
Very good point.
But he went on and on and on about how it was a bad call, and I can't for the life of me fathom where he's coming from. Now, keep in mind, I'm a person who hates the targeting rule because of the fact that there's no way to enforce it consistently, because nobody knows what targeting is. It's like different for everyone, and it's inexplicably applied. I mean, and then Joel Klatt talked about, I think he talked about the Clemson play where Trevor Lawrence ducked his head and ended up getting Shaun Wade tossed from the game, because again, this is a case of where you're changing the landing point of a defender who's already committed to where he's going. This was almost, I mean, if you were going to draw up the opposite of the Shaun Wade targeting call, this Williams call would have been the exact opposite, because again, it wasn't a case of the Ohio State receiver, I think that one was Garrett Wilson, changing changing the landing point. This was just a matter of the dude leaping into the air and tucking his body in and just basically turning himself into a missile is what he did. I mean, there was no attempt to spread the arms out wide, wrap up the ball carrier, and make an open field tackle. This was just, I'm going to hit this man as hard as I can in the air, and hopefully he'll fall down.
Well, as I said, I'm not sure if it's the way that they've been coached. I would certainly hope it's not, because not only you would hate to see anyone get hurt. I mean, that when we say anyone get hurt, that could be the Nebraska defensive backs themselves. The fact, like you said, like launching,
Absolutely.
leading with your head. That there have been players who have suffered severe injury that you certainly fear for the long-term consequences of that, let alone the fact that like the players like a Chris Olave who may have sustained a concussion or something like that. But I certainly hope that it's something that Scott Frost and his coaches rectify for the betterment of their team going forward.
Well, if they weren't taught to do that, you can almost guarantee they'll be taught not to do it now that two starting defensive backs are going to miss the first half against Wisconsin. So they're going to have to learn how to play within the rules, and I didn't see them playing within the rules on Saturday. So it was an unfortunate sort of a sideshow or sidebar from the game, and thankfully that's behind us, and hopefully Chris Olave will be okay and be able to get back on the field this week because, if you go and look at what Ohio State did through the air, Justin Fields, you can tell who he was comfortable with because Garrett Wilson, 7 catches, 129 yards. Chris Olave, 6 catches, 104 yards. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba was the next one with only 2. So, and then a few guys with 1 catch. So he was going to his main 2 guys.
Can't really blame him. And I think, when you consider the fact that over the summer, despite the disjointed nature that this season has taken, the fact that Justin Fields probably was working with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson over and over on 7-on-7 drills, I'm sure that certainly added to the comfort level.
Sure. And they did use Julian Fleming and Jamison Williams to some extent clearing out as well. So, as game plans change, we may see a different distribution. Who knows? One thing we do know, so far in 2020, it is not the year of the tight end. Jeremy Ruckert and Luke Farrell combined for 2 catches for 11 yards. So, not the year of the tight end.
Somehow, certain things never, ever change. If anything, 2020, for all of the craziness that it has brought us, the fact that Ohio State still does not throw to their tight ends, that has not changed.
Exactly. All right, we're going to turn our attention, Chip, toward the champions. Ohio State's graded out the champions, and players of the game were Haskell Garrett on defense, Justin Fields on offense, and Chris Booker on special teams. Take a look at the champions. Defense, Tommy Togiai, Jonathan Cooper, Sean Wade, Marcus Hooker, Marcus Williamson, Baron Browning, and Tuff Borland. So you actually had a better pick-to-click defensively than I did because Marcus Hooker graded out a champion. Pete Werner did not. So there you go. Player of the game, Haskell Garrett. So obviously he's a champion. Offense, Luke Farrell, Jeremy Ruckert, Garrett Wilson, Josh Myers, Wyatt Davis, Nicholas Petit-Frere, Thayer Munford, and Justin Fields. Now, I saw this running game, and I'm not seeing this many offensive linemen that should be grading out as champions.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, maybe the coaches, in terms of their criteria, it's a little different than ours. I don't know. I like I said, I mean, to each their own, but yeah, I would agree with your assessment.
All right. So Penn State this week, we got the nobody's in the stadium, but it's a whiteout because it's a night game. So the Buckeyes and Nittany Lions will be renewing their, I guess it's a rivalry. I mean, some people think it is. It's not the main rivalry, but it's become the most competitive game every year for the Buckeyes in recent years. And, Penn State's going to bring it because the Nittany Lions, Chip, are coming off a 36-35 loss at Indiana. I don't mean to laugh there, but I have to say I never believe in Indiana, even when people think they're going to be good. This is a game. I didn't get to see the entire thing because I had some other commitments, but I did see the first couple drives of the game. It looked like Penn State was going to walk all over Indiana early. Indiana couldn't do anything defensively, kind of reminiscent of Ohio State on defense on the first drive, with maybe more missed tackles along the way and less receivers covered along the way. And then Penn State takes the lead late in the game on a completely blown coverage by Indiana on a long touchdown pass from Clifford to Jahan Dotson. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that first name properly, but that's what I got for you right now. And then Indiana goes, it turns the ball over on downs in the next, I believe it was on downs in the next drive. And Penn State only needs to get a first down and run out the clock. And Devin Ford can't keep himself from crossing the goal line as Indiana just let him score. And they went up 28-20. Still a one-score game. Chip, at this point, if you're James Franklin, you got a 7-point lead. Yeah, you're going to force a touchdown and a 2-point conversion, but don't you think about maybe going for two there and making that a 2-score game? You've got the 7 points, so if the other team wants to come down and is able to get the tying score, you're probably still going to overtime anyway, although Indiana may have gone for two. It's possible. But don't you think if you're afraid of Indiana getting a 2-point conversion, then maybe you think pretty highly of the percentage chances of getting a 2-point conversion, and maybe you should go for two yourself and put those percentages to the test and put that game away.
Very good points. Watching some of that, Penn State has only themselves to blame. We talk about Sean Clifford had a good game in the sense of, with his legs. It was kind of in a lot of ways almost like watching Ohio State. The fact that Penn State did not really run the ball as effectively with their running game, and Sean Clifford kind of supplemented the running game, but he also had 2 interceptions that were very costly. We're talking about missed field goals. Penn State, like you said, I think James Franklin is notorious for game mismanagement. Clock mismanagement. So I think you raise a really good point about Penn State could have gone for a 2-point conversion and possibly have clinched the game as a winner. Instead, they wound up on the losing end, controversially, but they still wound up on the losing end.
Right. See, so the Hoosiers get the ball back. There was a minute 42 on the clock. They're out of timeouts. I believe they were out of timeouts at that point, and they've got to go the length of the field from the 25. And they manage a 7-play, 75-yard drive. Michael Penix, 1-yard run, and they get the 2-point conversion on another Michael Penix run. And we go into overtime. Penn State scores in 4 plays, 25 yards, 9-yard pass from Sean Clifford, and they take the lead. And then Indiana gets the tying the touchdown on their first possession of the overtime, and Wapfiler from Michael Penix, and then they go for 2. Now, this is an aggressive move, and Penix drops back, doesn't find anybody, rolls to his left, dives for the pylon, Chip, and they call it a touchdown. He gets the pylon with the ball. Now, on replay, this, of course, they looked at it upstairs. It's one of those plays where I think it's not overcalled no matter how it's not overturned no matter how they call it on the field. The back of the ball clearly hits the sideline. There's no doubt about it. The front of the ball hits the pylon. There's no doubt about that. But where the doubt for me comes in, where you can't really see from any of the angles that I saw on television, is where is the front of the ball in relation to the breaking the plane, which, again, that imaginary plane at the front of the white stripe, all it has to do is touch that. And where is the front tip of the ball before the back end of the ball hits the sideline? I can't tell. So I think that call stands no matter how they call it on the field.
Yeah, it was definitely, I see exactly the points that you're making. It was so close that, watching it and all the different angles and as you said, it was going to be extremely difficult for them to overturn it, which obviously they did not. And what a way to lose if you're Penn State. I'm happy for Indiana because they flashed I don't want to call it a highlight, but they pointed out that this is the first time Indiana defeated a top 10 team since 1987. Mm-hmm. And something that we often refer to as a dark day in Ohio State football history, or at least Earl Bruce used to.
The darkest.
So, the darkest day. So I'm happy for Indiana, but what a way to lose so controversially at the end.
Yeah, and for me, the real problem is because I don't think he got in, but from the television angles that you have, there's nothing straight down the line that shows where the front of the ball is before the back of the ball hits the ground. There's nothing that shows that definitively to me, and that's why I think they had to stick with the call on the field. But again, I think that they don't overturn it no matter how they initially rule it. The referee right there made the call immediately. There was no real hesitation. So I think it is tough. I think that's one where if you're on the winning side of that, you are taking that, and you're taking that money and running straight to the bank. And if you're on the losing side of that, you are going to probably complain about this for many years to come.
I'll say this much. I haven't heard a lot of complaints from from James Franklin or anyone else, in terms of how unfair or how unjust. I'm sure on social media, the Penn State fans on the social media platforms, I'm sure, are justifiably still fuming and indignant. But I want to give credit to James Franklin. I haven't heard anything from him.
Yeah, and I think if you're Penn State, you have to be more concerned that it even came down to that call, because there's so many mistakes that were made. You mentioned the team missed 3 field goals. One was a really long one, but they missed 3 field goals. They had 2 interceptions. They had a fumble in scoring position, they also had 100 yards in penalties. These are things that they add up in games that are close. It's really hard to win when you have that many mistakes against even a mediocre team can beat you when you have those kind of mistakes. And Indiana, we won't know till later in the season. Are they a mediocre team? Are they a good team? We don't know yet.
No, we don't. It's very weird to think of the fact that Rutgers won their season opener against Michigan State, and Indiana, eked out in overtime against Penn State. And at the end of the Indiana-Rutgers game this coming weekend, one of those teams will still be undefeated and leading the Big Ten East. Think about that.
That is insane. If you just walked in to 2020 and just took a look at the scores from Saturday, you would not know what has happened when Michigan State is losing to Rutgers and Penn State is losing to Indiana. It just seems like, as they did on the TV show Community, it seems like the darkest timeline. But that's what we're faced with. And how about, we'll just go down the scoreboard real quick. Wisconsin crushed Illinois. There was no repeat of last year's upset win by Illinois. Graham Mertz with a very Justin Fields-like 20 of 21, 248 yards, but 5 touchdown passes. What a replacement for Jack Cohn. Although I'm hearing rumblings. Did I hear rumblings today about a positive COVID-19 test for Graham Mertz?
It's not been confirmed yet, but it's certainly looking that Graham Mertz is probably going to be out, which means that Wisconsin will be down to their 3rd-string quarterback against that Nebraska team this coming weekend. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but it certainly seems likely that Graham Mertz is out.
Yikes! And that's a tough one because it's 3 weeks. It's 2 weeks for the quarantine, and then a week back in training before you can get back on the field. So, because of the restrictions that the Big Ten put on this, on the pandemic, if that is confirmed, that's a 3-week process for Graham Mertz, and that's tough for Wisconsin. We talked about Penn State, Indiana. We talked about Ohio State over Nebraska. Michigan took care of business against Minnesota in the Brown Jug battle. Minnesota had no answer on defense for Michigan, none whatsoever, and really they struggled to make plays down the field. It seemed like the plays were there to be made. Rashad Bateman was their big play guy. He did get 9 catches for 101 yards, but not a lot of big plays from them. And just it just looked like a typical Michigan-Minnesota game, not like a season where you expect maybe Minnesota will come out of the West.
Yeah, I really thought going into this that Minnesota was going to beat Michigan after all the rumblings that you heard of Michigan with players transferring out and everything going on up there. So credit to the Wolverines for coming out, taking advantage. Like you said, Minnesota defensively was very bad. The offensive line for Minnesota, I really thought was going to protect Tanner Morgan far better than they did. So we'll see how good Michigan is. Now, I think they're going to have a pretty easy go of it in one of their rivalry games this weekend against Michigan State. But I'm not completely on that bandwagon, all that the Wolverines have necessarily turned the corner. And I think Minnesota certainly has a lot of work to do to get back to that championship level that they played in 2019.
Yeah, Rutgers 38, Michigan State 27, and Greg Schiano is undefeated at Rutgers this year. Tennessee, they were going to hire him, and then backlash from the fans made them not hire him. Is Tennessee undefeated this year, Chip?
They are not.
Well, there you go. Could have been you, Tennessee. You could be the undefeated team instead of Rutgers, but you decided not to, so that's what you get. Purdue beat their most hated rivals, Iowa, 24-20. This one surprised me a little bit. I kind of, we know about Purdue's offense, but I thought Iowa was going to be a little bit better this year.
Well, the thing is, you give credit to Purdue. I mean, they were without Jeff Brom. Their coach was not there. They were also Rondale Moore. I'm not sure exactly the reason why, but he did not play. So for Purdue to come out and defeat Iowa in the season opener, I think it speaks volumes about how much better Purdue is for 2020. It remains to be seen about Iowa for 2020 as well, because one game does not a season make. I think if anything, Iowa, I think there's still going to be a threat in that Big Ten West division.
Did Purdue hire the wrong Brom as head coach?
Probably not.
All right. And, I mean, it was in West Lafayette. And as any Ohio State fan can tell you, weird things happen in West Lafayette.
Yes, they do, unfortunately.
Northwestern beat the crap out of Maryland 43-3. I think you and I both may have, even though we didn't rate them that highly, we may have overestimated Michigan State. We may have underestimated Rutgers, and we may have overestimated Maryland and underestimated Northwestern.
I'm willing to concede that the underestimating of Northwestern, because Peyton Ramsey had a really good debut. I'm going to hold off on saying that I underestimated Rutgers simply because of who they played in the first game of the season. I knew that Michigan State was going to be bad. The fact that Rutgers was able to, I think, create or capitalize 7 turnovers against the Spartans. So I think Michigan State has certainly fallen to the bottom of the Big Ten East. I think that's going to be a very difficult rebuilding year for Mel Tucker. It's rather unfortunate considering he was hired so late. I keep going back to it, but it's true, is that anytime that there's a new coach, a new coaching staff coming in, that it's so important that you have a good spring to kind of lay the foundation of what it is that you want to do. Well, Michigan State didn't have it. Now, granted, you're going to say, and I'm not denying it, well, Rutgers didn't have it either. But I think Schiano was able to kind of, we referenced the transfer portal, Brendan White, some other players, I think he was able to take advantage of that for like maybe a faster improvement, if you will. And again, Rutgers was playing Michigan State, so I don't want to oversell it. But yeah, Maryland, that we'll see. I think now that you mention it, I may have overstated Maryland, because we'll see how Rutgers and Maryland, when they eventually clash, who comes out on top there.
Well, obviously, Greg Schiano's team forced all of those turnovers, and they're just ball hawks in Piscataway. But I think if I were to not to overreact to the first week or anything, but if I had our predictions to do over again, I think I'm gonna put the Spartans dead last in the East.
Yeah, I think I would certainly do the same, and that's I think it's going to be a brutal game this coming Saturday when the Wolverines and the Spartans do battle.
All right, well, let us continue our look ahead to Ohio State, Penn State in the what would traditionally be the whiteout game when it happens in Happy Valley. It seems odd to me that whenever the game is in at Penn State, it's always a night game, and when it's in Columbus, it always seems to be a day game. Seems a little strange to me, a little fishy, but it is what it is. And we're going to have a guest. We're going to bring him in now to talk a little bit about this Saturday's game against Penn State. We'll do that right after this. All right, joining us this week on the Silver Bullets podcast, we're happy to have with us Matt DeBear, the founder and senior editor of Roar Lions Roar. Matt, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, great to be with you guys.
I guess I want to start out by, I know this is still a fresh wound in your memory, but the final play controversy aside, what happened with Penn State at Indiana, and what were some of the contributing factors, do you think, to the end result?
Well, I think the biggest thing was, if you look at just the raw numbers and just kind of the way the game played out for about 58 minutes, Penn State really controlled the game on both sides. It was just a bunch of, in a lot of cases, unforced errors. The two big interceptions that Clifford threw, the fumble on the goal line by the backup quarterback, Will Levis, who was presumably in there to run kind of a short yardage, power, quarterback draw kind of play. A couple of special teams miscues, missed field goals, just kind of a litany of errors that in a lot of ways are really uncharacteristic. I know there's strong opinions about James Franklin in a lot of ways, but the kind of things that went wrong up until the last couple minutes of the game are really things that haven't been a part of really any of his teams. And, for whatever reason, whether it's the abbreviated schedule and the uniqueness of season prep this year or who knows what, I think it just was a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes that, really led a game that, if they don't make those, they control pretty handily ultimately in the end.
So, Matt, I had a question about Penn State's running game because, Sean Clifford, he had, 17 carries for 119 yards, showing his versatility with his legs as well as his arm. Do you think Penn State is going to continue that committee approach? Because it looked like from an outsider's perspective, obviously with the loss of Journey Brown, Devin Ford, Noah Kane. I hope I don't this is not intentional. Is it Kevon Lee?
Yes.
Is that how you pronounce it? Do you think they're going to continue that committee approach for the rest of the season?
Well, it's kind of the huge unknown. Our expectation going into Saturday was actually that you were going to see Noah Kane get the bulk of the carries. He went out with an apparent injury, foot, leg, something like that on the first series. So I think he only had 3 or 4 carries, something like that, which really pushed things down to Devin Ford, who I think finished with 19 or 20, and then the two freshmen, Kevon Lee and Keziah Holmes, had a handful for each of them. So I think it was kind of adjustment on the fly on Saturday with Clifford probably running a little bit more than they would have otherwise liked. But I think it was also somewhat out of necessity when you're down to your third string running back. And I know they're high on all 3 of those kids that are healthy and did play, but at the same time, there's a reason they're 3rd, 4th, and 5th on the depth chart. Before Journey Brown went out. So I think as long as the uncertainty around Journey Brown's availability, which is just a huge unknown, there really hasn't been a whole lot said about that other than it's a health issue and they're kind of keeping their options open. And whatever the status of Noah Kane is, I think if Kane's healthy, I think you'll see him, kind of be that bellwether guy. If he's not, then I think you're going to see those three young backs as well as Sean Clifford, like you said, more of that committee approach.
Matt, what did you see out of Penn State's defense? I know it's hard to take a lot out of opening day with everything looks a little bit discombobulated a lot of the time. But what did you see from the Penn State defense that stood out to you both on the good side and the bad side?
Well, I think there was a couple of really positive things, especially when you take it in comparison to where they really struggled last year. Shaka Toney and Jason Oweh were really effective getting to Michael Penix. I think they only recorded officially 3 sacks as a team, but they were getting to him pretty consistently from the first snap and really until the end of the game, which really was a struggle last year. Even as solid a player as Yetur Gross-Matos was and has been in his brief NFL stint now, they really struggled to consistently generate pressure with 4. So I think that was a positive sign. And a secondary that really struggled last year, especially on get off the field plays, on especially 3rd and long, was really much more effective. Tariq Castro-Fields, who's a name that everyone's heard for 4 years now, was really solid. He's healthy now. And then the name that's kind of surprised a lot of people, even on our side of things, is Joey Porter Jr., the son of the great Joey Porter that everyone remembers as a Steeler. He took over that other corner spot and really was very impressive and really the first extended action he's seen. But they've got a really deep group of redshirt freshmen or true sophomore cornerbacks that they're really high on. And you saw a lot of those guys. Keaton Ellis and Marquise Walker, who played quite a bit last year, got quite a bit of run. And then there's another redshirt freshman, Daquan Hardy, that played a fair amount as well on Saturday. So those are probably the 2 positives. I think the negative is the elephant in the room is once again Penn State had a lead late, and I think at that point going into the final drive of regulation for Indiana, I think they had 140 yards of offense, something like that, and they kind of went right down the field in less than a minute and a half and 75 yards to tie the game, and that's kind of been going back to the 2017 Ohio State game and the 2016 Rose Bowl against USC. And really since then, just about every game that Penn State has lost in the last 4+ seasons now, they've held leads, often multiple score leads late into the fourth quarter. And the defense hasn't been able to get that one stop when they need it. And so I think that's going to be the question that remains unanswered until that situation presents itself again. You can Brent Pry's group, for all their success and effectiveness, can they make that play when it really matters? And they weren't able to again on Saturday.
Why don't we switch back to some more happy thoughts then? So I guess from an outsider watching, it looked like Penn State offensively. I mean, Freiermuth was Freiermuth. Baby Gronk. I mean, he was good. He had that touchdown early in the game. Can you tell our listeners about, some of because it looked like Dotson had a really good game. And again, you mentioned some of those freshman backs. It looked like offensively that the new offensive coordinator did, what was expected was, come in and kind of, instead of installing a new system, to blend his philosophies into the existing talent that's there for Penn State.
Yeah. And that was really, when Ricky Ronnie left for the Old Dominion job last year, they weren't going to reinvent the wheel. It's at its roots, it's still pretty much the same offense that Joe Moorhead installed back, over 4 years ago now. They've adjusted it to their personnel and philosophies. They're not running exactly what they did, but at its root, it's still a spread offense that, is relying on the RPO and that read option game. I will say, I think the biggest difference with Kirk Ciarrocca, at least through one game, is they're much more committed to a more efficient offense, if you will. Really, since Joe Moorhead had arrived and installed that drastically different look, they've been almost overly reliant on the explosive plays. And obviously, any team needs that as part of their repertoire. But I think what got Penn State in trouble to a large degree, over the last 4 seasons really has been when that big play isn't there, they've struggled to, even if they're not going to score, to hold on to the ball for, a couple minutes even, they'll get off the field. Our defense will get off the field. The offense goes out and goes 3 and out and, runs 30 seconds off the clock. Obviously game situations, dictate that you need to, have that more efficient offense. But I think it's been from a just overall perspective, something that they've really struggled with. And they, controlled the ball to the extent of, I think, 45 minutes to 15, give or take, in time of possession. We're more than okay with, 4 or 5 yards at a time rushing the ball. But I think the question is, do they have that explosiveness in them? You mentioned Freiermuth. He had 7 catches, but only 60 yards. I think his long was maybe 15. So if you take that out, he had 6 catches for about 45. Jahan Dotson had the big 60-yard catch, but before that, I think he had 3 for around 30. A lot of short, 6, 7, 8-yard routes. And I guess the question that we all have, and it's something that we're really not probably going to get an answer until 3 or 4 games into this season, is do they have that guy that can stretch the field? I think they do, and a guy like freshman Keondre, Lambert Smith, or Parker Washington, but they're still true freshmen, and you're trying to get their feet under them. Are they looking for that kind of play? It felt like they were a few times on Saturday, and just either the pass wasn't there, and so Clifford would tuck it and run or dump it off, or even that the offensive line breaks down and that the deeper route isn't able to develop. So I think that was the big difference, from a team that has been so reliant on that big play. All of a sudden it's gone. Partially, I think, dictated by just personnel. They don't have that KJ Hamler. They don't have a Chris Godwin or Deshaun Hamilton or Mike Gesicki, some of those names of years past. So I think developing that part of the offense is the next step. I think they did a lot of things really well on Saturday, but they didn't have that big play that I think more and more you need in today's game, the way defenses are built, especially at Ohio State's level, where you're not going to put together a 10 or 12 play drive most of the time against a defense like Ohio State, for example.
Matt, Sean Clifford now is, obviously the 2 interceptions aren't good, but other than that, the day looked pretty good. The numbers are good, 238 on 24 out of 35. He ran 17 times for 119 yards and a touchdown. Where do you see his development right now? And what can you tell us about the interceptions? Is this something that's, was it tipped by a receiver? Is Sean making a bad read? What are you seeing out of the quarterback right now?
Well, I think he's, it's a name that's been around for so long. He was a redshirt junior. So he's a name that's been around the program for 4 years now, and he committed so early that it feels like he's been a part of it for 6 or 7 years, if you follow recruiting close enough. I think he's got a lot of talent. I think the athleticism running the ball is something that is part of his game, and I think he's proven that he's effective doing it. But I think for Penn State to take that next step, Sean Clifford needs to take that next step. The first interception on Saturday, we were just talking about this on our website Slack here earlier this afternoon, just trying to figure out what exactly happened. It was a screen pass that was there, and the ball just was about 10 feet over Devin Ford's head and about 10 yards past him. So I don't know if it was a case of trying to throw the ball away and something happened, or just an uncharacteristic mistake. The second one, he just was a poor throw. Pat Freiermuth was open and he just missed him. He overthrew him over his head and a little too far in front of him, right into the safety behind him. So I think he's a solid quarterback. Like you said, the numbers are there. They really only completed that one big play down the field, the go-ahead score to Jahan Dotson late. So that's that next step is going from game manager, if you will, to a guy that can win you a game. I don't think, Saturday notwithstanding, he's not going to lose you very many games. He takes care of the ball really well. He's not going to get you in too much trouble typically, but he's not at that level yet, and whether he gets there or not is up for debate. He's not the guy quite yet that is going to go out and win you the game either.
So I want you mentioned recruiting. I want to bring up a name on the Penn State roster who will be familiar to Ohio State followers of recruiting, and that is Lamont Wade. And Wade, correct me if I'm wrong, strongly considered leaving for the NFL draft, stuck around Can you kind of, give our listeners an idea in terms of like the kind of playmaking he brings to the Penn State secondary?
Well, he was recruited as a cornerback and moved to safety. I think it was right after his first season. Kind of played all over the place as a true freshman, and then made that move to safety after that first year. Like you said, he was one of those guys that never really officially said he was coming back, but there was a lot of scuttlebutt and rumor that he was considering leaving for the draft. Obviously, he's back. He actually entered the transfer portal 2 years ago, I think it was, and opted to come back. He's a guy that does a lot of things really well, but he also seems to be in the middle of a lot of plays where you're just kind of left scratching your head. What happened. There were a couple of plays early on, especially on Saturday, where Penn State uses him a lot almost as a nickel back. They call it the star position, and they'll move him down from a safety spot almost as kind of a third cornerback in certain situations and bring on another safety and pull off a linebacker. And he got lined up, in man-on-man coverage a couple times Saturday and got beat, and Penix just missed the throw. And so you see plays like that, and then he was also, though, kind of that clown show of an end of a first half with the fumble and then Indiana fumbling it right back before the missed field goal at the very end of the half. He's down there from his safety spot recovering the fumble. Made a big play early in the second half to pick off Penix, jumped a crossing route that kind of reignited Penn State and started, kind of swung momentum a little bit to get things back on at least trending in the right direction. So he's one of those, I don't want to say, all or nothing sort of guys, but he's a playmaker, but he's also the kind of guy that I think in the wrong matchup for him can be exposed a little bit just because he's not the biggest guy, he's not the quickest guy. I think he's a really smart player, but I think he doesn't have that one elite skill, whether it's athleticism or speed or something like that makes up for what he does lack in size and strength.
So I want to bring up a couple of areas because, a lot of people expect Ohio State, Penn State to be a very close game like it has been in recent years. A couple of things, I wonder which of them concerns you more. One of them, Penn State missing 3 field goals against Indiana. I think you can hand wave away the 57-yard attempt by Jordan Stout, but Jake Pinniger with 2 misses. And then I'm seeing this right, 100 yards in penalties?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier the kind of the uncharacteristic mistakes, and to start with the penalties, for 6+ years now, Penn State's been one of the least penalized teams in the country. And there are a couple kind of dubious calls. There are 2 that stick out that were accounted for 30 of those yards. There was a offensive pass interference call on Pat Freiermuth that was iffy at best, and then there was just a missed face mask call on Adiza Isaac, who's kind of the third defensive end. Unfortunately, on that last drive, got to Penix, got him around the shoulder, but in real time, it certainly looked like he got him by the face mask. But just, a couple holding calls, a couple false starts, a couple, I think there was a couple offsides calls, just, again, uncharacteristic sorts of things. And even the field goal kicking, Jake Pinniger was, I believe it was 11 of 12 or 12 of 13 a year ago. And, the first miss from 25 yards or maybe even closer than that right off the upright. The other one was from about 47 or 48 and just, kind of stayed on a straight line off the left hash. But just, again, things that certainly the 25-yard field goal is just one of those things you scratch your head for a guy that, really since about halfway through his freshman season 2 years ago has been super reliable. And just, one more thing that went sideways on Saturday. And the penalties thing is, I think, having watched enough football from the start of the season up until now all over the country, it seems like one of those things that I think is just, you just kind of go with it to a large degree because of the oddity of practices and training camps and things like that. I would expect that to get better as the year goes on, just based on track record. But it's one of those things that we'll see how quickly it gets cleaned up with a big game coming up on Saturday.
So we've talked a lot about, some of the players who are a little bit more familiar to, our listeners, Sean Clifford, Freiermuth, Dotson. I was wondering, and again, it can be on the offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. Can you give our listeners a name or two. Again, it really doesn't matter if they're both on offense, both on defense, but a couple players that you anticipate could, come shining through for the big game against Ohio State on Saturday.
I think I'll give you a couple on offense and a couple on defense that are young guys that I know the staff is really high on just from all the feedback we've gotten. Two wide receivers, Keondre Lambert Smith was a 4-star kid out of Virginia. But they've been really high on since he got on the campus in January. Still a little bit raw, but just one of those freak athletic guys. 6'2", runs really well. He had a couple big catches on Saturday. And then another true freshman receiver from Texas, Parker Washington, who only had the 2 catches. But was a guy that they was listed as a starter going into the game on Saturday, and I think is going to get better and better as he gets more acclimated to the college game. On the defensive side of the ball, this is probably a name that quite a few of your listeners are familiar with, just as he's been around for so long. But Shucked, the 5th-year senior defensive end, he and Jason Oweh were just almost unblockable at times on Saturday off both ends. I think he ended up getting credited certainly with 2 sacks. I think he had 7 or 8 tackles for the game. And then at linebacker, Brandon Smith, another 5-star kid that I know Ohio State recruited really highly. True sophomore now. He's kind of the next name after Micah Parsons that I know they have really high hopes for. And then another freshman, redshirt freshman linebacker, Lance Dixon, who played quite a bit on Saturday after Jesse Lukita was ejected for a targeting call. So you'll see quite a bit of him in the first half, especially on Saturday. A really, really athletic kid, really raw still, but a guy that they have really high expectations for down the road.
Matt, before we let you go, I wanted to pick your brain on Saturday's game. I want you to put your sort of your money where your mouth is. I need to know from you, where do you think this game is going to be won or lost in terms of units on the field for the teams? And can I get a score prediction from you?
I think the biggest matchups, I think, at least on paper, I think this is Penn State's best offensive line in quite a while, and we know Ohio State always has a great defensive line. I think it's going to be Penn State's kind of untested receiving core. After Jahan Dotson, there really isn't and Pat Freiermuth at tight end, there really isn't an obvious number 2/3 guy. I know Ohio State's breaking in 3 new starters with Shaun Wade returning back there. So I think that is probably Penn State on offense, Ohio State versus on defense. Then I'd even go with the same thing on the other side of the ball. I'm excited to see what Tony and Oweh do against Ohio State's offensive line. But Ohio State, if it's not the best receiving core in the country, it's second or third behind an Alabama or some of those other teams that are always up there too. Penn State's really high on their secondary, but this is going to be their toughest test of the year. As far as a score prediction, I have a hard time seeing this game isn't going to be close, just because really since James Franklin's been at Penn State, they've been close games. Even last year, I know it ended up, I think, 11 points at the end. Mm-hmm. Penn State was a drop pass away from, I think, tying it up or at least having first and goal late. So even last year, where I think it was probably the biggest talent mismatch in several years, it still was a close game into late third quarter, early fourth quarter. Obviously, no fans, no whiteout crowd. The great equalizer that Penn State's relied on quite a bit. That's the $1 million question. How does that impact both teams? But I think what the spread opened at yesterday, 8 or 9 points. I think that's probably about right. I told someone earlier today, 28-20, 31-21, something like that, I think is in Ohio State's favor is probably seems about right. If Penn State doesn't take care of the ball again like they did on Saturday, then I think it could get out of hand potentially. But if Penn State, hangs on to it and it does and kind of gets back to more of that mistake-free game, I think it'll be close. I just don't know if they have the athletes ultimately in the end to make it, one of those 1-point games or last-second wins like they had a couple years ago.
All right. Well, we're going to be finding out what's going to happen on Saturday. It's always an exciting time when these two teams meet, and it's kind of weird to meet, number one, so early in the season, and number two, for so early in the season to be so late in the year. But 2020 is nothing if not consistently weird. So Matt DeBear, the founder and senior editor of Roar Lions Roar, really appreciate you coming on. Can you tell people where they can find you on the interwebs?
We are on the web at roarlionsroar.com. You can get us on Twitter at RLR blog. We've got a podcast, Roar Lions Radio, that you can get on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and everything else that's out there that has podcasts. We'll have our preview for the game up probably on Thursday or Friday this week, and then we'll have a recap on Sunday and all sorts of preview stuff on the website during the week.
All right, Matt DeBear, thank you so much for being with us on the Silver Bullets podcast. We appreciate it.
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks once again to Matt DeBear from Roar Lions Roar for being with us this week and telling us a little bit about the Penn State side of things. And now, you and I, Chip, this is where we would normally answer questions from our listeners. We don't have any this week, but there's, you can certainly hit us up on Twitter, and we will answer your question. Ask us anything you want to know about the Buckeyes or college football in general. We'll give you whatever answers we have, or whatever opinions we may have. And you can find me on Twitter at Mike36Fan. Chip, tell them where they can find you.
They can find me on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And not only I can be found on Twitter, but also I'm a contributor to Athlon Sports as well.
All right. And we will try to remember to create a thread for questions as well on Buckeye Scoop, because that'll make things easier, I think, for some of our Buckeye Scoop readers. Are we calling them scoopers, Chip? Have we got a ruling on that?
Something I forgot to see if that's the official term. We should find out.
We definitely need to find that out. All right, so that's how you reach us, and we're happy to answer any of your questions on the next show. So after the Penn State game, you want to know why something happened or why something didn't happen, let us know, and we will do our best to give you a good response here on the show. Chip, let's turn our attention toward those Nittany Lions. They're going to be more fired up than ever, because now that they're behind the 8 ball with a loss in the Big Ten East, they know that really their only shot to get back in the race is to beat Ohio State and have that head-to-head tiebreaker. And it's at home. They're going to give Ryan Day's team everything they've got, and I would expect them to play a little bit cleaner than they did against Indiana.
I would expect that, but I would also expect them to come out with a hunger and a passion, because with the exception of last year, any Penn State fan will tell you that, in their mind, these were games against Ohio State that Penn State should have won. When they think back to 2017, 2018, obviously that they won up there in 2016. This is the kind of thing where they believe that they have the talent to not only play with, but beat Ohio State. So I think they're going to really come in with a hunger and a focus.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of recruiting, Penn State is right up there and doing a good job with that. James Franklin has had his teams playing well, and they've just kind of crashed and burned at the end of some of these games. And we'll always remember that 4th and 5 play from a couple of years back, and that call was very curious. We will remember the overtime game where Joey Bosa sacked the quarterback using a running back. These have been some memorable times, but maybe the lack of a crowd will deaden the atmosphere. But I think this is going to be a very hard-hitting game. The players that I'm concerned about, I think. I don't know. It seems like he's been at Penn State for a while, Chip, is Shaka Toney. I think this is the guy that Ohio State needs to find a way to stop.
Yeah, Shaka Toney had a very good game against Indiana, and considering we talked about Justin Fields with taking unnecessary sacks, it'd be interesting to see how Ohio State handles Shaka Toney as a pass rusher.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a good, they traditionally have a good secondary, traditionally good linebacker play, and good defensive line. They're good at all three levels. But of course, they definitely, they give up some points to Indiana and some points late in the game to Indiana, and So you would think that Ohio State could get some things done. But I think both Penn State and Ohio State will be a little sharper coming off their first games. And again, I think that there's going to be a little extra passion for the Nittany Lions, knowing that this is really their shot. If they're going to win the Big Ten and perhaps punch a ticket into the college football playoff, there's really only one option left to them, and that's to win this game. They have to throw everything they can at Ohio State, because if they go down, if they go to 0-2, and they're effectively 2 games behind Ohio State because of the head-to-head loss, I just don't see a way back for them unless 2020 weirdness happens.
Right. I mean, after Penn State plays Ohio State, they get Maryland at home, and we were just talking about Maryland earlier, that Maryland, I think, is in for another long year. But you're right. I mean, like they really can't afford to fall 2 games behind in that Big Ten East race.
All right, Chip. That's going to bring us to the point of the show where we lay it all out on the line and we say what's going to happen, and we figure out what the final outcome might be for this week's game. We asked this of our guests. I'll ask this of you. What is your position group or unit that you think is really where this game is going to swing?
Well, we've already touched on it, but I think the Ohio State offensive line against that Penn State pass rush. We talked about Shucked. I think that's going to be crucial because the offensive line. I do not fault the offensive line entirely for the 4 sacks or whatever it was against Nebraska, but considering you're going up against a better pass rush, I think this is where the game is won or lost. I think the Ohio State offensive line needs to do whatever is necessary to slow down Shakatoni and that Penn State pass rush, because that's the only way that the Ohio State offense, it looks like Ohio State is going to be, at least for this early part of the season, is going to rely upon that passing game to get the running game going. And so I think you need to give as much time as possible to Justin Fields when he drops back to pass.
I agree with you about the pass rush, but I think it's even broader than that for me. It's the offensive line for Ohio State against the defensive line for Penn State, because that includes the run game. Ohio State has to be able to run the football better than it did against Nebraska, or at least as good if Justin Fields is as good as he was. And again, we don't really know what the status of Chris Olave will be for this week. Hopefully he's fine, because I think Olave and Garrett Wilson can beat any defense in the country, and I think Justin Fields can deliver the ball against any defense in the country. So it really kind of comes down to what else can you do. You can't just be one-dimensional against a team like Penn State. So you have to be able to mix in runs and have them at least respect that run. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be cracking 8-yard runs or 6-yard runs every time with the occasional 50, 60-yarder, but you have to stick with it. You have to commit to it, and you have to make them honor it, because if they don't, then they can tee off on you in the pass rush and commit more people into coverage, and and that's the great equalizer. So I think you hit it right on the head with the offensive line against Penn State, but I see it both in the pass and the running game. So it comes time for our picks to click. So I'm going to let you start on offense. Who's your pick to click on offense for Ohio State against the Nittany Lions?
I know it's going to seem very almost cliche, but I think this is the game that you need Justin Fields to truly step up. I know it sounds kind of hyperbolic considering he's coming off such a great game against Nebraska, but going into Happy Valley, and granted it's not going to be a whiteout, but it's still, you're talking against a very talented team, arguably the most talented team that's on Ohio State's 2020 schedule. So I'm looking for Justin Fields to rise to the occasion against Penn State.
All right. I am going to say that Penn State's going to commit some people to stopping what Ohio State does well, but I really don't think they have an answer. I don't know that anyone will have an answer for Garrett Wilson in the slot. So you and I are swapping our picks to click from last week, and I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson because he's going to especially have to carry more of the load if Chris Olave's out, and Olave's a guy who I might actually have picked if we knew for sure he was playing. So as we record this, we're not sure, so I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson. That brings us to the defensive side of the ball, and this is going to. I'm really interested to know who you think is going to click against Penn State on the defensive side.
Defense is a little tough because, as we said, it wasn't necessarily their best moment. But I'm going to go with Shaun Wade. I think that Shaun Wade is. I mean, I know he had a pass broken up against Nebraska, but I think Shaun Wade's going to have some big plays against Penn State.
That's a good call, actually. I like the pick. I don't think that he had a fantastic game in week one, but I think Baron Browning's going to make some plays in this game, so I'm going to pick Baron Browning. It's just a gut feeling. This is nothing, not basing this on anything. Sometimes I do that. Sometimes my gut just says, hey, I think this guy's going to have a good game. So
I like it.
So Baron Browning, Justin Hilliard wasn't playing last week, so that's kind of a bummer. I really wanted to see Justin Hilliard and Jonathan Cooper have big years this year, and maybe they still will. But some other guys I think that are candidates here is maybe Zach Harrison. After not starting this week, maybe he gets to start this week and uses that little extra motivation to have a big game. I know that he's supposed to be the next big thing at defensive end, the next guy. You had Bosa, then you had Chase Young, and now it's supposed to be Zach Harrison. And we've seen glimpses, but we haven't seen the whole thing yet. So he's another guy that I consider, but I just think that there'll be some plays in that medium range. I think Baron Browning, I like him for maybe a sack and a pass broken up, and some tackles. I know that that probably if there's a secondary matchup in this game that is concerning, it really is the main concern, is Ohio State covering Pat Freiermuth.
Oh yeah, that's a matchup issue. I'm going to be curious to see how Ohio State chooses to handle that.
I mean, in the past they put Pete Werner on him, and who did a pretty decent job. I mean, you can only really limit Pat Freiermuth. You can't ever shut him completely down. So I think that it'll be interesting to see if they go back to Pete Werner for this, or if they try something else.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, Werner would be an ideal candidate. It just remains to be seen if Kerry Combs thinks that he can get away with using somebody else.
Exactly. Well, all right. That is probably it, unless you have anything else you want to talk about.
No, I'm good. I'm ready for Saturday night, that's for sure.
All right, we're going to do it. We'll watch the game this weekend. You and I will come back and talk about it. And, it's good. Now we're in the season. We've got games behind us. We've got games ahead of us. It's all happening. And it's a time that we at times didn't think we would ever get to see. But next week we'll come back. We'll talk about the Penn State game. We'll preview Rutgers, and we'll see if we can get another guest on to preview Rutgers. We definitely need some more Rutgers insight into our lives, I think.
There you go. Who doesn't?
Well, as you mentioned, you are at Chip Minnich on Twitter, and you write for Athlon Sports. So your stuff can be found over there. I am at Mike36Fan on Twitter. You can read my grumpy old Buckeye column at Buckeye Scoop, and I just had the introductory grumpy old Buckeye on the Buckeye Scoop this week, formerly at the Ozone, and hopefully people enjoyed it. I didn't expect to be writing about 1,000 words for the first game, but there were a lot of things that stuck out to me, and we'll see how it goes. This will probably be a close game, so there'll probably be a lot of things that again stick out and make me want to shake my fist at the sky. So we'll be back with that this week. Please, if you haven't already done so, become a Buckeye Scoop subscriber, and I think that the time is now. If you haven't done it yet, we're in the season, so it's time to get on board and get all that good stuff on the forums. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on there that doesn't make it to our free content on the front page. You'll want to listen to all of our Buckeye Scoop podcasts, including the Buckeye Weekly and the Morning Scoop, the Sloop Cast. What else do we got? Scoop World Order.
Yeah, I mean, Buckeye Weekly. I mean, there's so much. There's just, Gives in the Bank. I mean, Alex Gleitman with the ADEC. I mean, there's just so much to choose from that, Stephanie Odie, is having periodic episodes with, I think she had an opportunity to talk with Shelley Meyer last week. I mean, there's never a dull moment on the Buckeye Scoop, to put it that way.
There you go. I couldn't have given a better ad read if I tried, Chip, than what you just gave. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
All right, let's see what happens this weekend against Penn State. Chip, you and I are out of here. Let's do what we always do at the end. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks.